Howdy, all you delicious people! I'm here today to review Dexter: New Blood. So the pilot episode of it, technically, because it's kind of a reimagining, or it's like it has a lot of the same familiar beats as the original Dexter show, but it's also trying to do something new. So you will see certain things from the Dexter show come here. Even in the first pilot episode, there is quite a few Easter eggs that people might not catch up on because maybe they hadn't seen the pilot episode of Dexter. Maybe they hadn't seen any number of things. And so definitely go and check out the Dexter show, the whole 8 seasons of it, or how many ever seasons. Go and check those all out, then come here, because even though it says New Blood, it's going off of a show that has already existed. So this is exciting. Dexter New Blood. I would have not have thought that this show would actually be out. It's kind of one of those where there has been rumblings and like people have said like, yeah, like we want to revive the Dexter show, but you kind of feel it's a clickbaiting thing. You kind of feel like I'm going to wait till the first episode plops out and then I'm going to be like, oh, okay, so this is back now. Great. So supposedly this show is to be a 10-year gap from the original Dexter series. So that way we can kind of adjust to there being unfamiliar surroundings with a very familiar character with some references of the previous Dexter iteration of things. And so for this episode, it seems that they are to reference Harry, but are we going to get a Harry in this season? Well, I'll go into that in spoilers, but I will say that there is to be there is to possibly be a Harry here, but I'll have to explain that when we get into spoilers. Uh, in this episode, we have Dexter, who is to have been placed within this small town, and so now we have a Dexter where it's been 10 years seemingly since he has gone and drawn blood, meaning killed a human being. And so there seems to be a point for Dexter of us thinking that like, okay, there has to be a reason for us to have seen this show. Are we just gonna have a Dexter that doesn't kill anybody and is in this small town and but it seems that there is to be a tease going on in this episode. It seems like there is some fun that we have with this character. I will let everybody know in this episode there is to be a kill room being put together in the pilot of this episode. So yeah, so there is going to be someone at the end of this episode who dies. We'll eventually figure that out once I talk about it in spoilers, but I want to kind of leave this cryptic here. Where can you go to say that you could see Dexter New Blood? It seems like there is some bootleggish like apps they can dare in fact watch this show. Check out Showtime to definitely watch Dexter. So that way you can support the show and it can keep running on numerous seasons. Because you would I'm so excited about this show coming back. So definitely support it if you can. But there are bootlegish options. You can go into a number of apps that would probably have this show that you can go out of your way to say that you've seen it for absolutely free. You could probably go on to a Google search and search for apps like Letter C Movies, and you should be able to see this episode right away. So you can say that you can watch Dexter: The New Blood, especially if you've watched all the other seasons and you are to 100% be all-knowing of the Dexter character. You could probably go into also other apps that I've probably recommended through a number of videos, a number of times of which that I've gone into stuff. Fox HD Movies, Google search that. The logo will say so. The title will say something different. It'll be like play 1080p HD movies, search for that app. You can, like, both of those together, or a combination of those, you can pretty much see anything. There probably is a cluster of other things that I could probably recommend, like TV Crush, but don't know if that's going to have Dexter New Blood on it. It should, because it's a TV show, right? So, with that said, with that covered, what is Dexter like in this pilot episode? So, Dexter has had a 10-year gap of killing a person. Dexter is to be helping us understand the new town of which he is to live in. Dexter is to be working in this store that is to sell blades and firearms. So there is some similarities to what Dexter had done before in some way. He is to kind of work at this, like, I guess you can call it a sports shop of sorts. And so it seems like him and his manager are kind of really buddy buddy. Jeff Jr. seems to uh, be kind of going and like having an interesting amount of dialogue with Dexter in this first episode. We'll leave that for spoilers. Uh, it's kind of weird going into the show because Dexter feels like he is drastically different from what I remember him in the actual Dexter show. It seems like a guy that has like a lot of like inner monologue, and we would get points like I was just waiting for an inner monologue to happen in this episode, and it doesn't feel like we really had that here. Plus, I was also waiting for the same Dexter intro, the like I was waiting for the old familiar music with the coffee beans and the slicing of stuff, and like I was kind of expecting that, and we didn't get it, and it just felt so weird. But I was kind of like realizing, I'm like, well, think about it. Like they probably didn't want to have the rights for any of that stuff. They probably just didn't want to seem like the exact same thing as before. Or maybe they're working their way up to that, which I think will be cool. Um, but there is a lot of Easter eggs that we see here, especially the whole Dexter coming in with the cinnamon roll thing. Like that was like, oh my god, that's basically just like the pilot where Dexter is a come in with donuts, and like so like we're having that same familiar kind of spot. Plus, also at some point, Dexter is to have this breakfast meal that seems very familiar to the intro of the Dexter show. So if you guys remember the Dexter intro and you're going into this episode, you're like, oh my god, like this is a familiar spot. So Dexter is to, within this episode, start to meet some unsavory characters. But while he's to also meet unsavory characters, we are to be also introduced to characters that Dexter has been friends with, or maybe quite possibly more than friends. And so maybe there is some kind of family that he is putting together, so to speak, in this episode. I'm trying to cryptically. There's a number of things going on in this pilot episode. So, with that said, it seems like there is some interesting characters that might quite possibly have some much more hidden stories. It seems right out of the gate, it's Dexter is to eventually, for some reason or another, go in to the sheriff's department and notice that there is a bunch of missing girls missing. And so, kind of curious if Dexter is going to start to get his itchy knife hand going a little bit. But speaking of knives, it seems we otherwise play to the fact of, again, some familiar things with Dexter and knives in this episode. And so we have a lot of fun with a lot of this stuff. So let's just go into spoilers. Let me be able to freely talk about all this. And this was like such a feel good comeback kind of thing. And we'll see where we really go with this show. So let's go into that double five time territory because it's about that time yet again to go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time again to spoil this show. So I knew that this show was to be dropping on November 7, but I didn't know when. And so all of a sudden they just dropped this episode. I'm like, okay, so when exactly is this show going to be on for Showtime? Are they just going to drop it in the middle of the day? What's going on? But anyways, so let's go into the very beginning of this episode. So, throughout a bulk of this episode, we have Dexter, who is to have a gun or a rifle in hand, a hunting rifle in hand, and is going and running into the forest chasing after this white deer. And Dexter is to not even have the Dexter Morgan name in this show. He is to be called something else throughout the whole entire thing. His last name really is Leslie, and his first name is to be James, but usually it seems that Dexter likes everyone to call him Jim, but some people even call him Jimmy in some part of this episode. So let's change up the names. So Jim, yeah, so let's just go with James Leslie. So James, who is Dexter, so for everyone that knows, so James is going off and consistently trying to go after this white elk, and he continues to just miss it and miss it. And toward the end of the episode, he gets pretty close. So, but let's backpedal. So, James is to miss this elk, and so he otherwise decides to go back into his home and just kind of gear up for his day. Gearing up for his day eventually leads us to having James getting his breakfast ready, and we find out that this season that evidently Deborah Morgan, of course, if people don't remember, of course, Deborah is Dexter's adopted sister. And so I'm assessing or assuming that Deborah is going to be the new Harry for this season. I'm like, oh my god, Deborah is going to be the Harry this season? That's going to be interesting. Because I figured probably, like, the guy who actually played Harry might have just been like, hey man, like I think he probably did have some, like, maybe some show complications. I think he probably was on Black Lightning for a long stretch of time, but maybe for whatever reason they just couldn't get him, so they just decided to go with Deborah. And plus, also, I guess since this is a new show, they wanted to do something new. So Dexter is to go on and complain about how cold it is, and Deborah's like, well, hey, you're the one that moved here. Yeah, like he needed to move to a small town where nobody knew who he was, and it'll be interesting to see if anyone is to eventually move their way to this small town to possibly find uh, James, aka Dexter Morgan. So, in this episode, we have Dexter going off to work, and so we have Fred Jr., who is to be Dexter's coworker, who is to desperately be wanting one of Dexter's or James's cinnamon rolls. And so Dexter's like, well, hey, I aim to please. Fred Jr. is talking about uh, him and his partner wanting to adopt a dog, and so they're trying to come up with names for it. And so it seems like they're bickering back, and like it seems that Fred Jr. and his husband is kind of bickering back and forth about it. And Dexter's like, "Hey man, I'm Switzerland. Like I don't want anything to do with coming up with names. Like, hey, you can kind of flip a quarter or something. Come up with a name." And Fred Jr. comes back to tell Dexter later on in the episode that they settled for Garfield being the dog's name. He shows him a picture of what the dog actually looks like. So hopefully that dog responds to Garfield. Who knows? So Dexter is to go on, and so two guys come to the shop. One guy named Bill Harris and another guy called Matt Caldwell. Matt Caldwell is to go to James and want a knife and then want a weapon. But here's the thing. Matt wants the most expensive, most flashy, most whatever kind of gun. And so James is like, okay, 9,000 gun, here you are. So Matt is like, okay, great, wrap it all up. And so I'll easily buy all of this right here and now. Dexter's like, well, that's great, but I need you to have a background check before I can give you a gun. He lets him take the knife after he purchases it, but the gun, not so much. Background check has to be processed. So Matt goes and is to kind of fill out information, and it seems that Matt weirdly was to be flagged by the FBI. And it's like, okay, that seems odd. So uh so Matt takes the knife and goes and 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 tries to scare his friend with this knife. And so both Matt and Bill end up walking out of this store, I guess, without gun in hand or any kind of real much of anything to hurt one another. But yeah, James already sees Matt as being this seemingly unsavory character, which is gonna really get under James's skin in this episode. So James is to go off, I guess, like his shift is over. So James was to have these collections of knives, which he ends up putting in seemingly uh, these little spots in this fold up thing. Which, of course, if you guys remember Dexter, he had this kind of fold out knife collection thing that we re-see here. And so Dexter is to go off and give a cleaver to some butcher, and he's like, oh hey, thanks James, I really appreciate it. And so James is to have these collection of knives in his truck, and a police officer is to pull him over. And so it's like, okay, what's going on here? Why is it that Dexter is all of a sudden getting pulled over? Is there something wrong with one of his lights? Is it going to be some little small thing that's going to mean nothing? And so this sheriff, who's to be Sheriff Angelo, or Angelo, I'm not even saying that correctly. Angela, um, is to pull over James, and so the real reason she's going to be pulling him over is to really just pull down his pants. Angela is to take James into her car and hump him as quickly as she can because Angela and James are a couple. They kiss, and so we're like, oh, okay, so this is kind of throwing us in the deep end for us to understand this world fairly quickly, the new world that Dexter is in now. So Angela and James are humping away, and so Angela all of a sudden is hearing over the radio that that Angela needs to go off to uh, try and cover some bakery crime, and Angela's like, well, she grabs the walkie or the radio, and she's like, well, can't so and so person cover it? Can't so and so other person cover it? And so, God, what is her name? Essler? Essler is to mention that no, one guy had his wisdom teeth pulled. Some other guys are just out of commission or busy doing other jobs, and so now Angela is to have to be forced to give up her humping situation to go off to go and handle some case. So James says it's like, well, hey, you can pull me over later, and we can try this again, rain check. And still, like, I'm waiting for a James inner monologue, and we're not getting it. It's so weird. It's so weird to not have to process or to not be thinking about these moments. And Dexter feels so different than what he was at some point in the original show. So it's so goofy to not have this inner monologue. But again, this is the pilot of this show. And so maybe we'll get back to that as the episodes go on. So, uh, so James is to go off, and so later on, it seems that uh, Dexter is even going to a get together where it seems there's a lot of people that are going and doing like line dancing, and so uh, Deborah is to ask like Dexter if he has like prepared for him doing line dancing, and Dexter is to say, yeah, I've been practicing, and he's like already starting to do certain movements or maneuvers. So uh so Dexter is to make it, or James is to make it to this bar where everybody is dancing, and so Angela had to kind of quick change out of her uniform to like kind of be in like civilian clothes, and so they both go to this bar together, and so all of a sudden they it seems like they know certain people in this bar, so it's like okay, so it's kind of helping us like getting to know certain other characters by them talking about it. And so Angela is to all of a sudden see this one drifter character being at this bar, and I believe it might be Lily being at this bar, possibly. And it seems like the girl is getting a bus ride out, but she wanted a burger before she left. But it seems there wasn't enough money for her to get this burger and to get bus fare. And so Angela is to kind of give this girl money, and is to say that there's kind of halfway house if this girl needs it, just in case she wants to kind of think before she leaves. So so Angela goes back to James, and James is to kind of tell her, it's like, you know what, you did a good thing there to just kind of give this girl money. Uh, and like Angela's like, well, I guess that's my one good deed for the day kind of thing. And so Angela all of a sudden is to kind of just go and sit down, but then she has to forcibly go off because she finds out that she has this app system where it seems that Audrey, her daughter, is to bring a lot of people in for some party, and there is to be a camera at Angela's house showcasing that. And so Angela's like, yeah, wouldn't like isn't it a good thing that like we didn't have this kind of app system in place when we were kids? And James is like, yeah, definitely. So now Angela has to go and leave Dexter, and so James, who is Dexter, is mentioning like, well, hey, like maybe you can go and pull me over sometime soon. Rain check. so uh so Angela's leaving and to go and take care of her daughter, which within the very next day, no wait, let's finish the bar sequence. So James all of a sudden re-meets back up with Caldwell, and Caldwell is trying to get Dexter to come to this party and that he's throwing, and James is just like, well, hey, like maybe I might be busy, not quite sure. So so James is to consistently keep going out onto the forest trying to get this one white elk, and so James to get kind of like the feeling that somebody's watching him or stalking him or following him within this forest where he's running and trying to get this white elk. And so we also get this one sequence where Dexter was to go and like put in place this one kind of bait to go and get these fish. And so Dex is to realize that the fish is to I guess have gotten to the bait, and so Dexter tries to pull out this chain to I guess retrieve these fish, of course, to eventually find instead that Deborah and this black monster like thing, maybe the dark passenger, is to jump from this hole to scare Dexter. And so we just have this weird sequence of dreams or something goofy here where Morgan is to tell Dexter, it's like, well, hey, I'm really proud of you that you haven't killed in 10 years. And so it seems that Deborah has really gone into just kind of consistently being uh, a person that has been there for Dex, but has also probably annoyed the crap out of him, possibly. So, uh, so James, after this bar sequence, is to head home to find someone in his home, and so James is to go and grab this axe, this kind of little small axe, to find all of a sudden Harrison is inside James's home. Harrison Morgan. And I'm like, oh my god, they're bringing back Harrison? And he's much older? He's like really old. He looks like he's in like his like late teen years. Like this kid is like, it's 10 years between the time of the show, and I'm just like, this does not look like a 10-year-old. He looks much older. But I'm okay with it. So Harrison is to sneak into James's house and is to say, like, you're Dexter Morgan, right? Like, you look familiar. Like, I've seen you before. And so James Leslie is to say, no, man, like, I'm not Dexter Morgan. I don't know, like, what you're looking for, but hey, man, like, the last bus leaves at this time. Like, hey, you should probably get going, right? Here's some bus fare. You should probably get going. So, was that whole time maybe Harrison stalking uh, Dexter, wanting to uh, wanting to see if this really was his father or not? Really, like, we kind of wonder how close to the vest Harrison had probably been watching over Dexter for who knows how long. He just comes out of the shadows and like, hey, I'm Harrison. I'm back on the show. So, so Morgan is to, or so James is to go off into work the next day, and so now Fred Jr. is to tell uh, James that it seemed that Matt Caldwell's uh, uh, background check went through, and because James had gone into the police precinct and talked to some of the sheriffs there, and they were kind of baffled why Caldwell would get flagged by the FBI too. Like Essler was kind of confused about that, and so I think Logan, who is a part of this detective agents or sheriff's department, goes and looks into it, and he's like, "Yeah, like that does seem weird." But when James arrives into work, Fred Jr. is to say like, "Hey, looks like this guy's cleared. Go ahead and drop off this gun at his house." Weirdly, because I guess they drop off guns at people's homes. I wouldn't. Like, hey, you're gonna pick it up at the store. Like, you can do whatever you want with it after that. But so James is trying to get out of dropping this gun off, and Fred Jr. is like, "Well, hey, me and my partner are going off to go and pick up this dog, and evidently the name of the dog is Garfield." Uh, and so Fred Jr. mentions that he lost the bet of the name, so they're just naming it Garfield. So James is to go and take this gun, this $9,000 gun, and drop it off at Caldwell's home. Of course, this home is having a party, and James is like, "Oh, great, a party." So I have to kind of maneuver and probably find wherever the heck Caldwell is. Oh, this is great. So, because I'm kind of doing this episode out of context because I don't feel there has to be 100% attachments to everything, and it's the natural progression of the show that I guess is to be or kind of taking down all the bullet points to get all the bullet points in this show is probably the more meat and potatoes of this review. So I'm not going to do it perfectly like the episodes. Gear up for that. But I'm trying to get all the points out. And maybe eventually I'll get, through other reviews, I'll get to a point where I'll do it perfectly like the episode. Or nowhere near. Who knows? We'll figure it out. So when I get through every single episode. So, uh, So James goes to this party, and let me know also in the comments below if you just want me to call James Dexter, because people might be very familiar with that name. I'm tripping over calling James Dexter this whole time because I just want to, because it's easier, because I'm familiar with that name, with this character, more so than the new James name. But again, people call him Jim or Jimmy or whatever the heck, whatever. So So James goes to this party and is to re-meet up with a guy named Bill. And so now Bill is to take James to where Matt is to find out that Matt is banging away at some woman, meaning that he's having some bedroom business with her. So both Bill and James decide to go off into the bathroom so that way Bill can do some lines of drugs, and then Bill can tell James about this boat story where Matt had supposedly killed or taken out 5 people all at once with some boating accident that Matt had committed. And so we're having James not wanting to hear this story because, of course, it's so tempting for James to be like, I want to just murder this guy. Like, he makes my skin crawl anyways, so I just want to murder him because, like, I just have that itch now. And so, and also with Bill telling this story, with supposedly this guy is to have scars that is to look like a wang upon his face. And I'm just like, all right, like, this guy is so weird. Um, telling us this whole story while he's doing lines of drugs. Then Bill is to also tell James like, "Hey, can you keep a secret?" If I were James, I'm like, "Yeah, sure, I can keep so many secrets," because James is to say, "Yeah, like I'm a person where secrets go to die." I would have said, yeah, my girlfriend is the sheriff of this place, and stupid you told the wrong hombre, but whatever. So James goes after this banging session. Uh, Matt finally is to go out the door to see James with the gun. So uh, James gives Matt the gun in the room, and so now he whips it out and is to almost point it at Morgan. There's no magazine, there's no bullet inside the gun, but still, Morgan is just to be severely irritated with this guy doing the crap that he's pulling. And so James takes the gun from Matt and smashes his nose, but then we realize that this is all just a an imagination of James, and it's not really going on here. And so we cut back to Matt holding the gun against James, and James just walks away because he's like, "Yeah, thanks for shopping. I'm gonna get the heck out of here." So now James goes off and is again going into the forest, going after this white elk, and like I'm gonna get there's a story here that I need to get to, but I feel like there's something else that I want to get to first. Uh, and then we'll put a pin in that, and then we'll come back to the other story that I need to get to. So James goes out in the forest, sees this white elk. Finally, he's like, "Oh my god, this is the perfect time." Uh, so Dexter is to have some feed to give to this deer, and so he's like, "Oh my god, this is so great!" Like, James is touching this deer, caressing this deer, whispering sweet nothings into this deer. I don't know. He's doing some kind of weird animal to animal because technically Dexter could be an animal in some sorts connection, and so bullets start to fly. And so the deer goes down. Matt Caldwell say, "Oh my God, I got this deer." And so now we have James who's ticked. And I mean ticked. And so uh so James goes to Caldwell, pops him in the face, knocks him unconscious, and this is for real now. This is not in Dexter's head. This is all happening. So let's put a pin in that because I need to go and do this one bit of story. So uh Dexter is to re-meet up with Angela and because he needs a tuna sandwich. And there's to be this diner that is to be closed uh, because of Edward Caldwell, who I believe is Edward Caldwell, is to have a special meeting there. And I guess he's some billionaire who can just throw his weight or money around and to have a diner closed specifically for him. And so outside this diner, there's to be a bunch of people that are like, give a hoot, don't pollute kind of thing, where they have their own little protest and they're telling this guy to like kill the drill, like don't like stop doing this because I guess they're mining for oil, I guess. And so they're trying to stop him. They're protesting that this guy is doing this. And so Edward goes outside after this meeting is finished and gives everybody hot cocoa because he's like, hey, yeah, like you guys can do whatever you want. It's okay. Like here's a thing of hot cocoa for being out here and so on and so forth. And so Audrey, who's Angela's daughter, who I guess skipped school because the world could end because this guy is to be drilling into everything to try to get oil out of it. And so Edward is to give Audrey this hot cocoa, and she ends up pouring it out in front of him, not on him, because that would have been better, but like she just pours it out and it splashes onto the ground and she walks away. Well, continues to protest, but like the mic has been dropped, so to speak, at this point. And so Edward is just like, oh well. Like, so I just spent money on something that you didn't consume or drink or whatever. Oh no, my heart is just, I'm hurt. You just dropped the mic on me. This guy's a billionaire. He doesn't give a about any of these people protesting, but he was nice enough to do something to just be like nice towards them. So, but all James is to gripe about is his tuna sandwich that he's waiting for, while he was at some point at his job on break at some point. So now let's get back to that situation, the Caldwell situation, the whole bopping and knocking Caldwell out. So now we are to revive and bring back Dexter. Because when James is to re-meet up with Harrison, Deborah is to come back in, or Deborah is to come in as Dexter's conscience, and is to remind him about all the people that had died because of Dexter being in their lives. And so Dexter is to be very hesitant about wanting to have Harrison back into his life. So Harrison was lied to and said that Dexter wasn't Dexter. His name is James Leslie. and hey kid, go and get this bus fare, go and leave town, but we'll get back to that. But Deborah was to mention LaGuardia and Dokes and all the people, of course, that Dexter had killed through a number of seasons of the show. And I was like, oh my god, good call. Also, we had Deborah mentioning that she had died and she pulls the bullet out of her chest. And I was like, yeah, it's such a good payout. Such a good moment. So, so James is to be Dexter now for this moment. And so uh evidently James is to have this little shed that he shifts into a kill room and goes and takes Caldwell and tapes him up and kind of makeshifts a kind of kill room that is to be familiar to our kill room that we've seen plenty of times. But Caldwell is to be taped like the usual way, but he's also to be roped to this table. So uh, James is to go and break this glass off this lantern to try and get a blood sample from Matt, because of course we can't go through the usual way of having Dexter be Dexter, because Dexter is not a CSI guy anymore. Like, he can't go and drug people, needle them, and and have them fall over, and we can't do that anymore. He doesn't have his blood samples like he had before, so he's coming up with his own way of keeping these samples. But then he realizes, you know what? I don't need trophies anymore. Like, so when Caldwell is to wake up, we have a moment where James is to now want Caldwell to confess about what he had did. Caldwell's like, "Oh, you're talking about that whole boat situation, right?" And so James is like, "Yeah, like confess that you killed those 5 people." And so Caldwell does admit that he did do the thing that Bill had said that he had done. And so Matt is now at some point telling, uh, of course, James that he's not going to get away with this. And James is like, I have. And like, and Caldwell's like, well, like, this is probably your first time. It's like, no, it isn't. It's like, I killed plenty of people. And so Caldwell's like, oh my God, you're a serial killer? And James is like, yeah. Like, so we have here where, like, Deborah isn't even coming in to be Dexter's Jiminy right now and to just like say, hey, you shouldn't do this, you haven't killed in 10 years. No, Deborah doesn't even show up at this point to do anything to stop him from doing this or whatever. And so, because Dexter's already here, Dexter's already at this point, Dexter's in his kill room. So Caldwell is to now say, it's like, well, hey, if you kill me, my father's gonna come after you. And and Morgan is just like, ooh, I'm scared. Ooh, yeah, oh no, not your dad. Oh, I'm scared. He won't even know, like, Caldwell's dad won't even know Dexter killed him. How will it ever come to that? It won't. And so Dexter goes and slices Caldwell in the heart, like every single person he's ever killed before. And so this first time back kind of gets a little sloppy because Morgan, of course, is rusty. and he admits that. And but the one thing that was good about this is that we have Morgan that says, like, well, the first rule of Harry's rules is to not get caught. And so uh, James is to say, it's like, well, hey, like, if we're going to do this, we're going to do this right. But it seems that at the tail end of this episode, there is weirdly to be this blood trail heading to a certain direction. And so we'll see what happens with this blood trail when we finish this episode. So James goes and chops the body up like we've seen before, puts him in little bags like we've seen before, and Dexter goes to take this body to a different location that I guess is to uh, be like a fishing tournament or something like that, where James can hide the body and not have anyone know. And so the very end of this is that James is to say that him coming to this whole new town is to have presented so many new lies that he wants to tell someone the truth. And so James goes back to Harrison before he leaves on this bus and is to tell him, like, yeah, I am Dexter Morgan. I am your father, Luke. No, that's not true. That's impossible. Like the whole, like, good. He goes and, like, is to tell Harrison, like, come home with me. And so I'm wondering how they're going to explain Harrison. Is he gonna be just his cousin? Is he just gonna, like, how are they gonna explain this? When is something going to slip and someone's going to say the wrong name somewhere? And I'm wondering when that time is going to happen. But we can just enjoy this moment with both James and Harrison reuniting to come back home again to have this blood trail of things. So with that said, I'm going to get the heck out of here because I know this show was like 50 some odd minutes. But God, was it so good to just come back to this. God, there were so many good moments in this one episode. And it didn't have to do much to win me over. And like it kind of went above and beyond that to kind of give us like a reminder of stuff that was to be before. And whatever. I was expecting for them to not reference the other show whatsoever, or to not bring anyone back, or like to have this like special episodes when there might be some kind of bringing back, but we'll see how this all plays out. But I'm going to get the heck out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody. And I hope I got everything. If I missed something, I apologize. I know I went and did this in a roundabout way, but if people have ever seen any review that I've ever done, I always do that. I think in the original show, in the original reviews, I kind of went into the show order, but this time around, I just kind of was just all over the place because this is also like a really late time for me to even be reviewing anything, so I apologize. But maybe next episode, I might get a clear path of everything. There's just a lot to present in this first episode. So with that said, I'm going to get out of here. Bye, everybody. Bye, everybody.